Hello out there. I'm the oldest nerd, and it's time once again for Talking Movies with Professor O. Professor O joins us from his study in Oklahoma. I'm here, as usual, in Texas, and we are ready to talk. We're going back into space. We've been to black and white Frankenstein parodies, so we're deciding that maybe we need to find another planet, and that is the setting for The Martian. The Martian, which is Matt Damon and Jessica Chastain and others, Jeff Daniels, in a what was put for an Oscar nomination as a comedy. It's not. It has some funny moments in it, but it's a very edge of your seat type of show. We have an idea that our main character is going to make it home eventually, but it's not an easy road, is it?
No, it's not. But it's funny you mentioned Young Frank. It's got control panels and lightning and
Yeah.
bad weather, but just no cobwebs and no Marty Feldman. I don't. Marty Feldman would have been fun to see him show up somewhere, but yeah, there are some. It's interesting. There are some commonalities, but yeah, what a fantastic film. Just um, and oh, it's got great story to tell. And I'll admit I have not read the book. I've got it. I've heard it's great. Everybody that's read the follow up book that's out right now, Project Hail Mary,
Yeah.
say that's just as good. But
Really.
one thing that was what really cool. It sounds like they really consulted with the author and worked well with him on this book. The
Yes,
source material.
Andy Weir, who wrote the book, actually wrote it originally as a blog, and so it was laid out linear. Which, my understanding, I've never written any books, but in a lot of books, you have a tendency of knowing kind of an outline of where it's going to start and where it's going to end, and I'm not sure Andy Weir actually knew that. And
Right.
Drew Goddard adapted it for the screen. He was supposed to direct, but had a conflict, and they brought in Ridley Scott. So here we are reviewing another Ridley Scott film.
there's a pattern to that. It's just because they're really damn good.
They are.
That's and that's funny. He had used the where they shot in Wadi Rum in Jordan, um
Right.
as I think Prometheus, so he was familiar with the territory, just
Yeah.
thinking, and of course he's familiar with the genre. It seems like a perfect match. Just oh, they have Ridley Scott on this, and the hardcore science is just so good in the and you think of science fiction with more science, you think Ridley Scott. It just
That's true.
even yeah,
Also, he's kind of underrated or under recognized for the fact that he can build a suspenseful film.
that's a good point. We think about the sets and the world building, but he can absolutely build. I think he is underrated on that, on the amount of suspense that he can put in. Yeah,
Because when you think about that in Blade Runner, and of course in Alien, Alien was
right.
just the essential horror movie, uh, haunted house film, just put in space, and it was timed just perfectly. And then Blade Runner had similar kind of things. They put it was a mystery tied up in suspense because everybody was always in danger, no matter what part of the movie there was, and of course. There's constant danger on Mars, so that it begins the film almost where Watney is caught in this windstorm. An antenna impales him, and he's left for dead.
Right.
And first of all, there are a lot of science problems with this, but the original book is the perpetrator of this, not necessarily Ridley Scott. For instance. Mars' atmosphere is so thin, a windstorm on Mars would maybe mess up your hair, but
Yeah,
that's about
yeah.
it.
That's exactly, yeah. That's one thing they brought in on the one making of documentary. brought in. I'm trying to remember the name of the scientist, but that was his single biggest thing. He said that's yeah, the windstorm on Mars is just it's gonna be yeah, like just a poof, and not what's enough to knock down the ship
Yeah.
and do those sort of things.
Well,
Uh,
that's what's in real life. That's what's preserved the Mars rover, which has been going now for how long? 15 years,
yeah,
and mostly it's because they expected it to last 3 months because the dust would cake up on the solar panels and it wouldn't work after. It wouldn't charge its batteries after that. But
right.
they didn't account for the little windstorms that would come and blow the dust off the solar
And
panels.
yeah, Curiosity is I
Yeah.
think it's Curiosity and Endurance. Both of them are
Yes.
about the same size as like a Toyota Corolla, and they are there and making incredible discoveries. Last I saw, it's of course they keep finding building blocks of life. They
Yes.
find organic material that they
Carbon.
surmise must have come from life, and
Yeah,
yeah,
they found carbon just recently, and that's certainly, we're carbon based, so that is a big thing. And of
yeah.
course, they found water on Mars about 4 months after this film came out.
That's right. That's exactly right. That was a fascinating discovery. That yeah, I mean they keep finding more and more. So it's still not an inviting world. And
No.
you mentioned anything can go wrong at any time. And that's where I'm jumping around just a bit, but
Oh
that's
yeah, you have
where
to.
when that when the airlock blows out and destroys when you think his life is stable, he's fixed everything, he's from like he always talks about, you go one thing to the next. What's the next problem? What's the next thing I got to do? Just science it out, science the crap out of this, and just and but then all of a sudden you're in the movie, maybe a kind of good thing to leading into the third act too. And that's when the hatch kind of one of the things blows and he loses all his potatoes. He loses his
Yeah.
garden, and that again just a reminder how dangerous the place is.
Yeah. And so that is something that he still had to figure out how to deal with after that, and that's when he starts working on the rover and the cross country trek to the supplies that are at the launch site for the next mission. So
Right. That's one little bit of narration that was very helpful. We've been talking a little before we started the podcast. We were talking about some things that may have just needed, and that was another one. Just to remind me, and it comes across in narration is like, wow, at the next launch site, there's a launcher there. There's a complete rocket ready to go, and that comes up late in the movie that they mention that because it's so far from. It doesn't even look like a possibility that he could use it, but
yeah,
finally, the way he extends the life of the rover, all the science he uses, one step after the what's the next problem? What's the next problem? How to solve that problem? And all of a sudden he's taking the rover on that cross country trip and sleeping underneath it, I think.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's another situation that they show the sun beating down on the surface, and so he has to be in the shade, and it's 80 degrees below zero in the shade actually. So that probably wouldn't be the best thing to do. It's warm
that
inside the rover, but that once again they're playing with a little bit of what would you call it, uh, script armor.
Earth, let's say it again.
Script armor.
Yeah, yeah. That's yeah. That's absolutely playing around with our expectations. I didn't thought about that. Sure, we think you'd need the bread. It's just going to be that much colder in the under the under the rover,
Yeah.
and that rover was incredible.
Yes.
Um, Real life piece really worked. I think each wheel is independently motorized.
Yeah.
There's no central axle.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
And the science behind the nuclear reactor that he puts in there is also very possible because the type of uranium they're putting in would not be harmful unless
Ah,
he breathed it in, and the most dangerous part of it was very hot. and
So that's why he could.
it used the heat to develop the electricity, but it would have been the wrong kind of voltage to recharge the rover. So all it was good for was a heater, but it would be a heater for as long as it ever needed.
But it's not like grabbing a piece of Chernobyl to stay warm.
No,
It's
no,
more, yeah.
it
that
wouldn't have been a bomb.
Yeah, yeah, and you're thinking about the radiation leakage and stuff like so. So he's Matt Damon's going to be okay. And you're really thinking about that when he's digging it up and putting it in, and how long his proximity to it. But I like the way you explain that, just a little more clear. That there is so much going on in the science behind the scenes
Yes.
that it's funny, the stuff you and I are familiar with, like a slingshot effect. When you've got the scene where Donald Glover is, and he's such a cool, total math geek nerd that comes up with the slingshot idea, but he's explaining how the slingshot works in the fastest ways possible. But you and I were talking about anybody in the room would know that in their sleep, but it's the audience that needs that explanation.
Well, they did that. They did that for Apollo 13. They didn't have enough power to actually
Right,
propel. They were supposed to go in orbit and then blow themselves out of orbit, and since they were just going around, they weren't
right,
going to be able to use much power, and so they used the slingshot effect there in order to
right.
get back to Earth, and that's basically what they did here.
Exactly.
Except, of
But
course,
I
they
love
did
the way
around the
that
moon.
But I like the way you mentioned too. Nobody in the audience, nobody there in the room would need that, but we needed that as the audience. And
Yes.
the one thing I needed a little bit more, you just gave me, is how Matt Damon, is how Watney could survive sitting next to that that irradiated material, the old material. But
Yeah.
but because of the way it's designed, it's not going to kill him. That's nice to know. Because I watching the movie, watching the movie the second, fourth, fifth time around, I'm thinking, well, they are going to show him at the end of the movie. He's going to be in Washington and teaching teaching astronauts, astronauts, and it's going to be okay. So, but I mean, even then, watching the movie, I was thinking, yeah, but how long is he going to be able to do that? The answer is as long as his normal lifespan is, because that didn't hurt him. But yeah, the only other thing I needed was, the they mentioned the Mav four, the Mav, the next site that they already had they'd already built the way out. They already built the
Yeah.
launcher there, and that certainly came in handy. And they needed, but they just don't quite bring that. Another thing that's interesting too, in terms of you think of all the Mars missions that NASA has done. The biggest difference here, and the filmmakers talked about this behind the scenes, production designer, is having the mothership. That
Yeah.
beautiful mothership even had artificial gravity, but that's one thing I you just don't see in your typical Mars mission, NASA mission. But
Yeah.
it seems like a great idea. I mean, I kind of wonder if NASA wants to eventually, if we'll eventually have to need to do something like that to truly support a mission.
Well, they did something like that in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was
Oh,
the
that's true.
idea that
Yeah.
you had to keep the astronauts exercised or else they would have bone loss.
Right.
And the difficulty there, though, of course, is in making something like that actually work.
Right.
And the intricacy and necessary to keep it sealed and all that kind of stuff would be a difficult thing to do the way they're doing it there.
Yeah, that's where the film becomes much more science fiction, is to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
basically the ship from 2001, all of a sudden it's there. But you just think about sustainability, and you're and like, like 2001, putting the infrastructure in 2001 is, kind of thinking, comparing the Martians kind of got more infrastructure than we usually see in. I'm thinking of a Mars film, like a Martian landing film. There was Canadian production from 2007. Almost everyone that I can think of, because we focused working on a Mars book, and so we watched a lot of Mars based films, and this is one of the few that has a any kind of space station. One, Conquest of Earth, an old one
Hmm.
from the 50s, has got a space station in Earth orbit, and they can launch from that, which makes a lot of sense. But this thing, the ship was so cool, so much infrastructure, and you're right, it's got the artificial gravity to help them be sustainable for the trip. But the building of that would be massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they kind of use the ISS. They did use the ISS as kind of a model for that ship. And when you
Yeah.
look at you look at the ISS versus that ship, but it's like the ISS is kind of like the central part. What we have at the ISS, but of course, they added a full blown engine to get that thing out to Mars
Right.
and a lot of other stuff.
Well, they're starting to use even on uh, the Ares capsule that just went on a mission around the moon. They had solar wings that came out on it in order
Right,
to power it rather than by using just whatever they had internal, which seemed to be a good idea. But
a
anyway,
great idea.
there is a thing that the ISS actually had this movie in their collection in 2022. They were watching this film on the ISS. That's kind of fun.
That's awesome. That makes sense that they'd have it in there. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I wonder if they had the director's cut, but
probably not.
the probably yeah, the directors. Yeah, we were the. You know, one thing you meant we were talking about the space station thing. And there was talk a little bit on the Artemis missions, that the upcoming landing on the moon missions,
Mhm.
there was talk of actually putting in a small moon like a or an orbit, a small moon lab, a lab that's orbiting the moon,
Yeah,
to give them, so in other words, they could dock with that, and it would have a little bit more infrastructure in the lab. The command module could dock with that. They have some infrastructure, and I think they may have ditched that idea and just gone straight, because but that was there for a little bit. I was just to get ready for this film. I was looking at the Artemis. It was so neat that we just had our moonshot, and I just kind of wanted to see how the Artemis went, just to kind of get ready, because this film is so full of hard science.
yeah, it is. It is, and
Yeah.
it's entertaining on that manner, and also just the human nature of it. A good amount of it. It took like 72 days to film this, and of that, 5 weeks were just Matt Damon.
Wow. Right. Right. Just on the documentary, they had the last shot that they filmed, and it was and it was just Matt Damon. And the last shot
Hmm.
was they had taken him out to the desert in Jordan, and he had that scruffy beard, and which makes sense. They were
Yeah,
let that beard grow,
they of
and
course had to film that first. So
yeah, right. But that was so much of the time. That totally makes sense. Just Matt Damon. It's so well done. Now that you mention that, that could get kind of tedious where we're just following one person. But the fact that they let him talk to himself, they had all those, that he's making the log and talks to himself. It never felt like that, those
yeah.
kind of slow parts of,
Well, it
Robinson
makes it, yeah,
Crusoe films.
it makes it work because in real life, in fact, you would want someone like that to keep a log of what was going on, and half of it is for posterity, the other half is for morale. You're basically telling your story to someone who might see it one day.
Yeah, yeah, and it made and then and for viewers, it made sense for us, and it made sense real quick that he wasn't just talking to himself. Although I would not need I would make a log up there whether there were cameras to record it or not, because I talk to myself. But
Well, yeah,
it,
it's one of the drawbacks of what we do. But,
it would have been right. It would have been a chatty. But yeah, he's making the log, and it never got slow. That's one of the things about when you think about watching Robinson Crusoe on Mars, which I finally did, working for the Mars book, which they was called Martian Pictures. But
right,
with
I like that.
the we watched Robinson Crusoe on Mars, and I had always kind of put that off because it just feels like, oh, he's going to be by himself. Where's the, and it's a Robinson Crusoe on Mars is a terrific film. But this film, it never slowed down at all. It just, even though he's by himself, it only slows down in a proper way, in that it does give you that sense of desolation. What am I going to do next? And how am I going? But he's such a scientist, and his personal makeup as a person is to just, what's the next thing I got to do? I could. He must have remembered that. Yeah, that's a good saying. I think it's from Carlos Castaneda. But when things go wrong, horribly wrong, or you just, even when you're just really frustrated about something, I could be miserable or I could be strong. The amount of work is the same. And when you really think about the amount of work is the same, you go, yep, might as well just take the next step.
Yeah, I think we've gotten through our careers that way. It's
Yeah,
just
that's well, no wonder that's right on the.
my favorite line in here, or series of lines,
Yeah.
was where this is when they're talking about how Watley is going to be able to escape, and he said, I know what they're doing. I know exactly what they're doing. They just keep repeating, go faster than any man in the history of space travel. Like that's a good thing. Like it will distract me from how insane their plan is. Yeah, I get to go faster than any man in the history of space travel because you're launching me in a convertible. Actually, it's worse than that because I won't be able to control the thing. And by the way, physicists, when describing things like acceleration, don't use the word fast. So they're only doing that in the hopes that I won't raise any objections to this lunacy because I like the way fastest man in history of space travel sounds. Pause. I do like the way it sounds. I mean, I like it a lot. I'm not going to tell him that, though.
And by then,
My favorite, my favorite.
it's so good. And by then, there's the whole setup. You're thinking as a viewer, you've seen him, and that's another way he's made it through. He's managed to have a sense of humor and also a sense of pride, and like a little bit, no real hubris, but just look at some just good pride. Look what I did. I'm a the botanist is the hero. I'm a botanist hero. I'm a space pirate on Mars. All
Right.
of those little bits of,
I
and
am
so
I
by
am
then
the
it's
greatest botanist in on this planet. Yeah, there's a
right.
lot of that. Yeah,
There's a lot of it, and it's all earned. And by the time he says, "Yeah, they just want me to," that's going to distract me. That's what the, and by the time, I'm kind of thinking, yeah, and he's going to end up embracing this, and he might as well, and he does, and it's just awesome. That's that would, and that's funny. That was the one part I had read. It had been a while since I'd seen the movie, and since I had seen the film, and I had read where when they first established communication, it does hit him emotionally. But
yeah,
honestly, he had all that emotion so much pent up until he was finally sitting in that convertible, that convertible on a rocket that's
yeah.
launched. That's when he finally just opens up and just and cries, let's go. The emotions just pour forth.
Right.
And but he's ready. I love the way. Now, I don't know if this is in the extent, but it's great. Before that launch, they do a true countdown, like a NASA countdown.
Yeah.
FIDO, and all those different abbreviations. That they do, like Apollo 13 has all those, go flight ready.
Mhm.
And they did that even for this flight just coming from, and by the time they got to him, he choked down that emotion, says ready. We're go. And oh man, that was an awesome liftoff. But talk about building suspense. That, even having seen it 5, 6 times, you know that liftoff was something else. That just, getting out of Mars. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat. I know he's going to make it, but I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, there's another quote here that I like, that it's between Mitch Henderson, the flight director, um, Vincent Kapoor, the mission director, and Bruce, the scientist that's trying to figure out how they can launch him and get fast enough to reach the mothership. Um, well, let's get to the bad parts. We need to remove the nose, LR, the windows, the whole of panel 19. You want to take the front of the ship off? The nose alone is 400 kilograms. You want to send a man into space without the front of his ship? No, we're going to have him cover it with a HAB canvas. The hull is mostly there to keep air in. Mars's atmosphere is so thin, you don't need a lot of streamlining. By the time the ship is going fast enough for the air resistance to matter, it'll be high enough that there will be practically no air. You want to send him into space under a tarp. Can I go on? No.
And
I
that
like that
was
line.
yeah. And that's interesting. We were talking about Okafor, and well, let's see and I'm looking for his what was his character's name? Donald Glover. Donald Glover was Rich Purnell. He wasn't in that
Yeah,
conversation,
he was
but
not. He was the one
but
that came up with the slingshot effect.
right. And
And
but Mitch Henderson was in that conversation, like you said. Mitch Henderson was just there, and oh gosh, where the Benedict Wong
right.
was, yeah, JPL. And it's funny how everybody has different kind of parts, because Benedict, yeah, he's more relaxed. He's saying, look, we got to lose 5,000 pounds, or I can't. I think it may have been another term for how much pounds they got to lose, how many. And he was very, no, you lose this, you don't need it. You don't need doors, you don't need windows, you don't need the front of the ship.
Yeah.
And that was the one place where Okafor lost his cool a little bit. Most of the time, he had, he maintained that sense of kind of NASA cool, but he was like, no, you can tell that
Yeah.
probably being an ex-pilot, he just can't
this
imagine
is
losing all that
madness. Yeah.
stuff. And that was another this one yeah, Vincent Kapoor, right, director of the Mars missions.
Right.
Yeah, the that seeing this many times around, that made more sense this time, the most sense of all, where because there's so much is coming at you so fast. Why do you need all of that stuff? No, you just wear your flight suit. You really don't need the front of the ship. You can just launch with a flight suit, and that probably was fairly scientific. One scientist said that this is 95% accurate. The some of the 5% is like sleeping under the rover. That's not, or the
Yeah.
Martian
Yeah.
sandstorm itself. But but yeah, that's the way they would actually need to.
Or how long you could stay there under Mars radiation, which is not.
We're still
Yeah.
uh, that that's where that ship, where you have the big ship on the way to Mars, and you can put insulating material inside on the edge of that ship. That's where that makes sense, because just, yeah, how much radiation you've got to deal with on a 2 year trip. 1 year there, year there, and year back. We're still figuring that out,
Yeah.
how people would survive. Yeah, I'm not sure we're there yet. We're still working the problem on that.
I think we
But
are. I think we are. But this is supposedly by 2045, so that's the idea that they had as the time frame on this.
that's a good point. I wasn't sure when. I love the way it's set. It's in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, the biggest science fiction part is that big ship itself. The kind of like the giant mothership. But yeah, you're
Right.
not sure. The other and behind this, it's funny. Some of the when Jeff Daniels was talking at NASA, I was looking at the stuff behind him, and in the background, the mise en scène, and it had a bunch of like old Atlas launchers and stuff, almost like a history, kind of like
Yes.
Space Center set up in the background. But I
Right.
but I was thinking NASA doesn't quite look like that. So yeah, you can tell a few things give you the idea. And the other thing that was kind of interesting, that was I set in the future, was that the Chinese have developed a massive launcher that apparently we did not know they had that big of a ship, a rocket ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could.
And they also, talking about safety and all of this, how important it is to, are you going to possibly sacrifice 6 astronauts or bring 5 of them back and lose one? And and it was kind of made more real when they decide to not do their safety checks in order to quickly launch the supply vessel, and it blows up on the pad.
That was more real. You're exactly right. That's
Yeah.
why that's why we have those safety checks. That's exactly right, because they skipped. And Jeff Daniels, that's one of the, may have come out a little bit more in humanizing him, because he comes across, when the first time through you watch the film, you think, when Sean Bean tells him you are a coward because he's afraid of losing the six to rescue the one.
Well,
And
it goes to show what you have when you have specialists. The flight director is interested in all of the astronauts. The director of NASA, which he wouldn't be called the director, he'd be called the administrator, but that's
right,
a bit different thing. His idea is if we have to consider not only the flight itself, but the way that government and the public is going to react. And so he has to be half scientist, half public relations person, half politician, and possibly many roles. And he's having to juggle those things. How am I going to
yeah,
what's going to happen if we try this and we miss it and all six of them die? What's going to happen to all of us?
right.
He has to keep that in mind. And so it makes him seem a little cold at first, but when you realize just how much he actually has on his mind when everybody else is laser focused on their own areas, you can understand that he's got quite a juggling act to do.
Yeah, they got the infrastructure of NASA just right. The
They did.
bureaucracy, and from each person's point of view, and the good thing is Teddy managed to stay on the right side of history, whereas Hal Holbrook from Capricorn One, not so much when considering
Yeah.
the NASA PR decides to fake a landing on Mars, and uh, and the only problem was, it's such a good film. I'm not going to if we ever do that film, I'll save the plot spoiler. It is
Okay.
a great. Why does everything go south? Why, even after they have a faked landing, why can't they just have the astronauts come back? I'll let I'll let people watch that. But Capricorn One is a great NASA film,
Yeah.
and that was
I,
another
I
thing.
think I think of Marooned too. If you remember
Oh
Marooned,
yeah. Oh, that is
that
and it's
was
interesting. Oh, what were you going to say?
that was kind of Apollo 13 before Apollo 13 happened.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And what's interesting, I thought of Maroon because you know who comes. It's interesting in this age, 2015, the Chinese come to the rescue, but in Marooned, the Russians come to the
Yes.
rescue, and there's no mention of the Russians in this film at all, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah. They mentioned the Chinese, but not the Russians, and I don't know if it was just because uh, there was some political problem at the time they were making the film, or at the time the book was being written, or if the Russians just wouldn't allow them to uh, use their space agency in the film. Who knows?
Well, there was a guy who was thinking of that in Russia, but I think he fell off a balcony. So I,
Wow,
but then,
how did that happen?
but then you look at 2015, and people keep falling off more and more balconies in Putin's Russia. By the time we get to this in 2015, and so it feels like the country, whereas in 1967 with Marooned, it feels like the country 68 whenever that was made.
Yeah,
It feels like the country that's out there that might lend a hand would have been Russia. And of course, Chinese was not spacefaring by then anyway, but it did feel
yeah,
right. It feels like there's common humanity. And this film, at the time it comes out, that common China just made a whole bunch of sense.
yeah.
And yeah,
And that's used once again in Gravity with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney.
right. I had forgotten that part. Right. That's exactly right. Oh yeah, that's a now yeah that's and which one's got more accurate science? I'm gonna go with this film. I like
Maybe
Gravity a
so.
lot, but I'm gonna
Maybe so.
that's just a quick instant read on that. I hadn't thought
At
about that.
the Oscars, see, I think it was um, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler were hosting the Oscars, and they said that this was a proof that George Clooney could not be more than 20 minutes in a room with women his own age. But was the joke they'd had there.
That's a good joke. That's a good. That's yeah. That's funny.
Anyway,
Oh, what?
we go back to this, and there's a little interesting thing about Donald Glover in here, where he's finally come up with the solution to everything, and he trips over his garbage can on his way out.
Right.
That was Donald Glover that tripped and just kept going.
Whoa, that he really did do
Yeah,
that.
it wasn't supposed to be. He was supposed to get up and say, I need more coffee. This time he gets up, trips over the garbage can, gets up and says, I need more coffee. I think it worked. The line worked better that way.
I think that how can a set tell a story visually? How can the mise en scène tell a story visually? That's and you're thinking the classic, the obsessed detective, Paul Newman, or you're looking at where they live that reflects who they are. That set is one of the best I've ever seen in a film to express the idea this guy hasn't slept, hasn't showered, is just focused on one thing. Total science nerd. I love the guy, but that set just reflects that. And I think he even pours, he throws something into his trash can that should go into a sink. But hey, I think he's thinking of it as a sink at the time, and then he shakes his head.
Yeah.
Then he gets the coffee after that. That coffee, oh God, yeah, he just drinks it straight. It's lukewarm.
Yeah.
But you kind of wondered if it, by the time that he got to NASA to explain the slingshot mission, had he taken a shower by then? And I think it's a pretty even bet. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Oh, I
we
love that
think Matt
character.
Damon probably took more showers than everybody else in the film.
Yeah, yeah. One one thing that was maybe in the extended cut that came out is apparently Kate Mara, who plays Beth Johansson, and then the actor, I think it was, she falls in love with the German national, Dr. Vogel, that they
Yeah.
end up having a relationship. And I think it's those. Yeah, having a relationship. Well, apparently, they're. Oh, that's right. This is a deleted scene. They were Michael Pena's character. They had little minor problems going on with the space station, the ship, that's the
Yeah.
mothership,
Yeah.
and his bedroom is something's going wrong, and it's just incredibly hot. So he's been sleeping in one of the. I think he's been sleeping in the docking bay or the airlock, and they looked at him and said, "One thing goes wrong, and you're toast." So he'd been sleeping there. So they changed bedrooms around, and the captain matches up Kate Mara with the German national, that astronaut, and she says, she looks to Jessica Chastain and says, "You mean you'll have me sleeping in there?" And 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 she looks at her and says, "We all know what's going on. It's a small
Yeah.
man." And it turns out they do get married after the flight, and she comes up and kisses his helmet before he goes off to make the bomb. To
Yeah.
make the bomb inside the space station. And,
Yeah.
oh God, I wonder if that was a science. How science that was. I mean, because they've got to slow down the mothership. The mothership's doing the slingshot around Mars, and
Yeah.
they've got to slow it down to the point that they're going to meet Matt Damon, whose ship is coming up, and it's going too fast, and so they make a bomb. I think at the front of the ship to just give it a little reverse,
Yeah.
slow it down some.
That would
Uh,
cut the momentum. The trouble that they have there, and even Neil deGrasse Tyson said that
ah,
in the space flight aspect of that, it was the closest to real science as he's ever seen. And the deal is, if you slow down too much, you go in orbit, because
right,
basically the difference
true.
between going in orbit and just going around with
Yeah.
your speed. If you slow down enough, you go into orbit. That's how we get orbiting the moon. We go 25,000 miles toward the moon, but we have to slow down when we get there, or else we'll go past it.
And we
Otherwise,
literally
and
fall into the orbit
we
of the.
fall into the orbit by
Yeah.
reducing speed that will keep us from becoming immune to the gravity. And
Right.
so they have to consider that too in the mothership there, that they slow down enough to where they can catch Matt Damon, but at the same time not slow enough to where they go into orbit, because they would have to use more power than they have to get out of orbit.
Right. Right. And then of course the other, it's a plot spoiler, but the other thing to yeah, you're right. So they can't slow down too much. They've still got to keep the slingshot effect going. They do
Hmm.
this reverse, this, the air coming out of the ship slows them down, and then Matt Damon does have to do his crazy idea and cut his glove and become Iron Man
Yeah.
and, and fly it. And it actually that's so interesting to hear what Neil deGrasse. So he says that all of that was pretty accurate that they were.
Fairly
Uh,
accurate. Now, the only thing that also was he doesn't have to sustain this air out of his glove. He could do just one blast, and that there's nothing to stop the momentum.
oh, all he could do was really one blast, and he would keep going. He, in other
Well,
words,
in the real world, that would be the way
right.
it would work. It would be one blast, and if you continued it, you would just speed up, and speeding up would not be really the best thing for him to do.
No, you're right. You're right. It's he's doing it as if the atmosphere and gravity is slowing him down, but it
Yeah,
wouldn't slow him down. Of
it
course,
would
the
not.
initial it would just continue to add to, if anything.
Yes.
And yeah, oh, that is a good point. That is a really good point. That's
But
that.
I think that the thing is that the pacing of this picture, if you remember in Indiana Jones, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're talking about thinking that the Ark was placed on this flying wing, which obviously wasn't big enough to put that big a cargo into, but they ran it quickly enough to where you didn't notice that. And I think that's the same thing here, that they did a number of things that played with the science a bit, but with the pacing as it was, you didn't have time to stop and think, no, that's not possible.
That's a great point. And it was so funny that yeah, Raiders of that they used the flying wing to, but that's a great point. Yeah, I sure didn't think about that with
No.
the pacing and the machine guns and the guy because even though it's got guns, they might as well have pulled out swords at that point. Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, it was just fantastic. Oh, fantastic. The we usually talk about the casting some, I know, and there's really not other than the one you mentioned in terms of behind the scenes. There's oh no, did we mention who the only other character, the only one character who there was a second thought? Did we mention who there? It was Jessica Chastain's character, and they initially were looking for um oh, she's on the tip of my tongue.
Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett, yeah,
Yeah.
Kate Blanchett, yeah, and it just, but there was a scheduling, yeah, problem, and I think Jessica Chastain works for that. Yeah, we
I
were
think she
talking
did. Yeah.
about before we started how some characters like Matt Damon has got to be instantly likable. It's funny comparing this to uh, the
Castaway,
Robinson
for instance.
Crusoe on Mars. That character is not as instantly likable.
No.
The actor is a good actor. I
I
don't know
think
what.
that they should have put Adam West on the surface instead of killing him.
That's a great point. Adam West dies within 10 minutes. It's a great point. And Adam West,
Yeah.
you're right. He is more likable. But Matt Damon's instantly, how can, just, you're just with him. But Jessica Chastain, it kind of takes a while to identify with her character, but you really do by the end. It works. And I think that kind of being a slow burn actually works in favor of the film. Um, and Jeff Daniels, like the way you mentioned it, his character, the way he lives his character, and his point of view, you do understand his point of view as things unfold. And it's such a good point about the infrastructure of NASA. Each one of them really they follow that point of view so well within NASA.
Yeah.
Uh, and watching over the astronauts, or this is my particular job, and how each one of them has all the way to Donald Glover, his point of view. It just works. And JPL, the way they make that a separate entity was
Yeah.
this is the first movie. There's maybe one other where there's JPL plays some, but this JPL really plays kind of a supporting actor starring role in a way in this
It really
film.
does. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I think it makes it very relatable because I mean, we all had our jobs. We're retired now, but when we had our jobs, they were the most important thing. And everybody else's jobs, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know anything about what we do here. They don't know what's so important about what we do here, but we know that it's more important than what they're doing, which
that's a
of course is the all weaved through this film.
And I still think of you. That's so well put because I still think about that point of view. Certain things that it's funny how what you've worked in a university like we have, you'll compare. Well, that would be like that guy's like the dean, and this guy's like a provost,
Yeah,
and but you've got your point of view, and you can still remember your point of view, which really, for fighting for your area, your department, it was the point of view that was needed, we needed at the time, and they do a super job of doing that in this film
yeah,
with
they
all
do.
the different departments and their points of view. And I love the way they even mentioned JPL, the history of JPL. They When it started in a classroom, and I think this is a
Yeah,
line in the film. Starts in a classroom with lab experiments. They blow up the classroom, and then they said, "Okay, go take that barn. You guys go take that barn and blow it up." And that barn became JPL, the Jet Propulsion
yeah.
Laboratory.
Well, it was a clever political thing. We're talking about in the real world, a clever political thing to put a NASA facility in just about every major congressional district. The
True.
the the flight center is in Houston. The launch center is in Florida. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory is in Alabama. The
Actually, Huntsville, Alabama has a JP. One part of JPL's in California, and then there's the
Right.
Huntsville has got. You're right, another giant facility, Huntsville,
Yeah,
Alabama.
I'm mistaking that. That's not GPL. It's um,
I forget what. Yeah, Werner von Braun. He worked out of there.
it was basically the missile place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. That's
and then
exactly
of
right.
course they had in uh, Nevada they have what Area 31. Um,
Right. Well put. And then and there's
no,
even
there's the places where they land the shuttle or used to land the shuttle,
oh,
which was Edwards Air Force. Yeah,
Edwards Air Force Base, and there's even a it's a great thing to do if you're on the way from New Orleans heading like toward Georgia or something like it's called the Rocket Testing Center, John Stennis, and of course they named these facilities after senators
yeah.
in all these different states who end up supporting NASA because there's so many jobs involved.
But I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes when you're watching the space flights, they will, cut to different, NASA facilities because they all have, some part of the mission going on, and that's always interesting to see whenever they do their press conferences and things like that. So
This
this represents it very well here, and by using a convention center in Budapest, they make it look very much like NASA headquarters, and we've been there. It does have that ultra modern look to it.
yeah, and the so yeah, I've never seen more space centers involved in almost any film because you've got the Chinese Space Center, which was and the Chinese Mission Control, NASA Mission Control, JPL Mission Control. So many, and that just and then you add Piccadilly's. For at the end of the film when you got it's kind of like the end of Apollo 13, people rooting
Yeah,
for everybody to come back. They have all, but those different mission controls, right? We discovered that was we were in our research before the film. That's in Budapest and at a building called the Whale, which is just and I. It sounds like it was not the building called the Whale is a conference center, just a gigantic
yeah,
conference center that they repurposed with a lot of gigantic screens to serve as mission control and this futuristic, like 2040s circa era mission control. And the Chinese mission control, and then JPL. But then all the conference rooms were in this building called the Whale. It just sounds like, and it's got louvered Venetian blinds, giant blinds, where it can
yeah,
control the amount of it. And the filmmakers love that. They could a lot of control over the lighting.
yeah,
But that's not the studio. The studio they used for the Mars set was also in Budapest, but that was a gigantic true film studio that's in Budapest. And you were saying they were close to each other. It's like within
they were a tram stop between each other. But what's interesting about this is that most of Star Wars was done at Shepperton Studios near London, because that was at one time the largest studio in the world, the largest inside studios in the world. And in Budapest, they made one that is that size but taller by about 20 feet. And they were able to use this in order to hang green screens to do some of the Martian surface and things like that. I mean, some of it was done in Jordan for close-ups and things like that. But for the long shots, they needed massive four-wall green screens, which they could do in Budapest.
Right, right, and then and give you that sense of scale in the largest
Yeah,
studio in the world. Yeah, that's which I don't know when it replaced Shepperton Studios as the largest, but I must have been around the time was the film was made, or maybe 5 years before. But it sounded
possibly.
like a fairly recent development, because that was a modern studio
Yeah, it
that
was.
had gigantic green screen, and it absolutely works. I mean, it feels like I, you could have asked me during the film, did they take Matt Damon to Jordan to these incredible exteriors, and they did. But I honestly, I was not thinking green screen at the time the film was made. It sells. It looks so real that
Well, the deal is, with the 5 weeks that they had to film with just Matt Damon, uh, a lot of that was done in Jordan. And so when it's time to reunite with the mothership, he's it's not hard to be acting when you see other people. You
right.
know,
So there really was a sense of community that
yeah,
when they came.
yeah,
Well, that's funny. That see it being of reunited. That when we were looking at this, when we were looking at Mars films, and when in putting together the book, the the latest film, we knew we had to work in The Martian into the book on Mars films, and so we were figuring out that kind of a way to do, because we thought you can't do a book about Mars and not have The Martian, and it
yeah,
was kind of lanyap. It came out just at the right time. We're finishing up, so because when we started this, the most current film was Mission to Mars. I mean, it took like 15 years to get this together. Mission to
yeah.
Mars. The film you mentioned, Red Planet, was
About 15 years
announced
earlier.
in
Yeah,
October. Yeah, and so Mission to Mars is, we're finally wrapping this thing. I mean, The Martian that comes out, and so we looked at it in a way. We looked at it through we're kind of, what way do we look at each film, and so we looked at prepping versus survivalism. And Matt Damon has his outlook that keeps him optimistic is much closer to that of a prepper, somebody who acknowledges that a hurricane could come, but it's not an apocalyptic event. Survivalists are more a little bit. I'm painting with a broad brush, but
yeah.
they're a little bit more paranoid. They're more into the government conspiracies or some sort of religious something destruction that's going to bring about the apocalypse. Whereas preppers are more like just your smart neighbors that get ready for that hurricane,
Or
and
tornado or
or
earthquake. Yeah,
exactly,
or
exactly, and
snowstorm.
or snowstorm, and
You
and
know,
they
there was some. I met some people from. Oh, I forget. I think it was South Dakota or something, and on a vacation we were on, and they said we like to go on vacation when the snow is the worst, because it's not fun to be trapped in your house, because there's only a amount of time that you can actually shovel it away. Otherwise, you just have to kind of stay there and hope for the best. And we said, well, how do you do this? How is it that when you lose power and you can't go out to get more food and things like this, what do you do?
yeah,
And they said, well, we have gas, so we don't lose that, and so we're able to keep the house heated, and we're able to cook. And I said, but do you have great stores of food? And he says, no. He said, you probably have a lot of stuff in your cabinet, in your pantry, that is there that you rarely eat. And what you do is, if you're snowed in, you just go to that. You get more of the pork and beans and the canned chili and whatever stuff that you wouldn't normally eat, but since it's there, you do, and that's enough. And so I thought, how interesting that you can be so blasé about it, that
Right.
this kind of stuff happens and they're just ready for it. And the same way that people along the coast are ready for hurricanes. I mean,
Yeah.
you keep extra water, you keep extra batteries. That's just what you do. It just happens to be there. It's not really worry. It's just good sense.
And that's the prepper mentality, where survivalists will kind of mix in, hurricanes happen, science, they're not a they're a product of scientific effects, that hurricanes, whereas a survivalist might be thinking it's the hand of God, it's the end of, I mean, that really doesn't help at the time. Thinking that it's the hand of God actually gets in the way of thinking, oh, we've got some pork and beans in that we haven't eaten in four
Yeah.
months. Whereas, so preppers tend to not be so ideological. They do just what you were saying. But they do think survival. The next thing that there were three things we discovered preppers do, and Matt Damon did them all. And the Nikki was really working on this aspect. And the other thing, comparing survivalists to preppers also think of, how can I repurpose something that I have? How can I, in a sense, even what is something I have that I can repurpose? And I'm
Yeah.
sure those people from North Dakota were great at that, if
Yes.
need be. And so Matt Damon's repurposing all sorts of stuff. You get the duct tape. He uses old duct tape, and when he's got to repair the hab lab to try and make maybe even a new garden, first thing he does, he gets all that old plastic, and then, I mean, he does tons of repurposes poop so that it
Yeah.
can be used to make a garden. Uh, but it's full, so he repurposes. And the last one, and this what reminded me when you said Matt, literally as an actor, Matt Damon comes and meets with, the sense of community is so important. And
Yes.
preppers feel like, where survivalists are say, that Ruby Ridge, I'm going to get away from, those black helicopters, and with that kind
Hmm.
of, and get away from everywhere, what's ideologically driven, and the government's coming, and they're going to go 50 miles away. Preppers, on the other hand, say don't get any further than 7 miles from your neighbor, because 7 miles is, past that, you're losing that sense of community. You
Yeah.
can no longer get, and that sense of community is so big. And so
Yeah.
Matt Damon had all those, and that is one of the reasons he really, when he does finally, God, he's brilliant repurposing. He comes up with, there's that Pathfinder that's buried, and I love the way both of those scientists, Matt Damon and Okafor, they, he's, where is he going? He's going to find the Pathfinder, the little skateboard thing on Mars that we sent in '97, and he's going to repurpose that for communication.
Yeah. Yeah, it's clever to see from the point of view on both sides, and I did enjoy that as well. But I think the nugget that I keep from this film, ever since I've seen it, is a matter of problem solving.
Right.
You break the
Yeah.
problem down, you do the math, you go to the next thing. And I've thought about that on a number of things since then, and it works. So
Yeah.
I take that with me as the lesson of this film. If you've got a problem, just do the math and work it out.
And do the math will even just keep your mind occupied enough, instead of losing yourself, which you could have lost, to hopelessness. Like at one of his
Yeah,
most hopeless points, he simply continues the experiments, which you think, why would you continue? They were going to be there for 2 weeks, however long,
yeah,
or 2 months, however they're going to. But the original mission gets interrupted within the first 10 days, and there's all sorts of undone experiments. Well, he's got the time to actually finish them. It keeps his mind busy. It keeps him from going nuts. But you just do the problem, and even when there might not be, you're working the problem, even when it might not directly lead to a solution. It kept his mind occupied,
yeah,
and I think probably that was during one of the worst times after the probe had blown up. I think there probably what he did. I'd have to probably there were things he did not only just keeping his mind occupied, but that led to the second rescue because there were so many.
Yeah.
Everything went wrong, so many ways.
And that's another thing, I used to do in my classes that you have to always count on what's going to go wrong. It's not if something goes wrong, it's when something goes wrong and what you do after something goes wrong. And
And
you
that's
think and you think about that because I mean if you talk about any special project we've ever done, something always turns south on it. And all you
that
have to do is try and anticipate what that's going to be and work out how what your alternative is going to be. And that's something I've done through my entire career is to figure out what we can do in order to keep going in case the thing we were depending on doesn't work.
and it seems like there's plenty of times when the thing you were depending on not would was when you look back and you look at the bubble gum and baling wire solutions that you had to think of at
Yeah.
the time, they actually turned out to be solutions that were maybe better than what you planned on.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, they kind of you met somebody, you looked at a problem in a new way, and and you realize, and sometimes in meeting that person that helps you, again that sense of community is built, and now you're working on this thing together, and so the problem led to actually better solutions than you'd ever thought of.
It reminds me of my old friend, our old friend Ken, who was
I
an
knew, yep.
who was an engineer, and one of the things that he taught me was that there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution.
That is so true. That is thinking of things down in the studio that that is exactly right. That
That's
a
true. That's
temporary
true.
solution. Yeah, when like we were talking about when we were looking for a way in the studio to have in doing the to have that going away shot for a student newscast, they had that last shot be something way back high from the set. And so the temporary solution Ken rigged, we had this old camera that we weren't using, and I hated having a camera that could give you a pretty good image, and but it just sitting there. So Ken put it up, rigged up a series of ropes like a sailing ship, and hung that camera up there, and it felt like a temporary solution. That thing lasted forever. We
It
kept
did.
that camera.
Well, we need to go, but we recommend to you The Martian. If you haven't
Oh,
seen it lately,
absolutely.
if you've never seen it before, absolutely see it. If you haven't
Oh,
seen it recently, you should see it again. It's
and
worth it.
this time around, it's just like you were saying. What's the takeaway you have from the film? And it's one of the stronger takeaways that that really affects your life day to day, working through issues. It just yeah, it's got a terrific takeaway. Good music too.
Yeah,
Is gonna the but a lot of it's of course dominated by disco music from the '70s. That was the only music he had to play.
yeah,
And, that was left. But anyway, yeah, fantastic film. Just
yeah.
uh,
Okay, next week we are going to be talking about what do we say we're going to talk about?
it skipped me too. It was that film that dealt with memory. No, I'm kidding. No, what were we talking about? It was from. We'll have to figure it out. It is totally.
I
It was
really had it on the tip of my tongue,
I
honestly,
know,
that
tip of
we
your
were
tongue.
going to
It's
talk about it because we want to do more science fiction films,
right.
and this particular one is a good science fiction film, and you'll agree with us when we tell you about it next week.
Yeah, and if you know what it
So,
is, let us know.
thank you, Professor O. We'll be back next week, and until then, don't go far.
Oh no, no, Serenity, Serenity.